Sometimes, Ben reflected, it was hard to tell who was leading whom when he watched the dogs patrolling the grounds together. Nikolas always huffed when he used this grand term, and said they were skulking, more like seeking out mischief. But Ben knew in their minds the dogs considered themselves to be protectors, guardians of their large two-legged pack. But it was comical seeing the negotiations and accommodations that went on between them. Puffball had working eyes, which was clearly to his advantage in the leading stakes, but Radolf was uncanny in his abilities despite his blindness. Again, Nikolas contended, the old dog was faking his disability and could cite some oddly persuasive arguments to back his theory. So when it seemed as if Radolf trotted happily into the shrubbery behind his permanent companion, it could also be said that he was merely lagging behind, observing his young charge to make sure the puppy went exactly where Radolf had planned to go in the first place. Which dog, therefore, found the remains in the shallow grave first was debatable. They'd both been digging at something, that was obvious from the state of their paws when they'd returned to the house, and it was very evident which one found their discovery more disturbing. Radolf didn't settle all that evening. On being released from his attachment lead, he drifted unhappily around the large glass kitchen, trailing a faint residue of his earlier activity across the stone flags. Finally, Nikolas glanced up from his paperwork, which he had been frowning over for some time. "What is wrong with that stupid dog of yours?" Ben ignored him and held up a bottle of olive oil. "Seriously? You want me to put this in with everything else?" Nikolas nodded. Ben glanced at the blender. "But it's chocolate and milk. Olive oil and chocolate and milk." Nikolas inclined his head again. "I make all this great food, and you want olive oil, chocolate whey, and milk." This time Nikolas merely gave him a knowing smirk. Ben was well aware that most of Nikolas's recreational pursuits would be classed as unhealthy, perhaps even dangerous, but he'd never thought he'd come to categorize a fitness regime so. Ben had lived his whole life treating his body like a temple, eating and exercising to glorify its perfection. Initially he'd been glad when Nikolas appeared to be doing the same. Appeared to be. To someone who didn't know better, it might just look as though Nicholas Mikkelsen had suddenly and surprisingly taken up running, working out, and following a nutritional plan. Ben, a few months into living with these changes, saw it a little differently. His confusion at events over the last few months was so great, however, that despite how much this strange new obsession of Nikolas's worried him, he didn't voice his real concerns. After all his professions of faithfulness, of love, after the commitment of changing his name, giving Nikolas a ring for fuck's sake, after all that, he'd up and left him more easily than he'd renounced his Ducati, his gym equipment, and his box set collection of The Walking Dead. Or at least this is how Ben knew his desertion must have struck everyone else. He knew none of this was true. He'd lived the heartache of his need to respond to God's call, to fulfill the promise he'd given him. He'd only just survived the pain of leaving Nikolas. He had not done what he'd done lightly. On the ice in Svalbard, he had genuinely sensed someone or something seeking him. He had spent his whole life preparing for such a summoning. It was why he'd joined the army, although he allowed his friends to think it was because there was no other outlet for someone with restless energy like his. It wasn't that. He'd been searching for something lost to him since he was 8, when his mother had not been home one day on his return from school. Martin and Sarah had explained it to him. God knocks, and if you open the door, he will enter. Ben had heard something, and he had been very willing to open that door. So he would cut a hand off, offer penance, crawl on bloodied knees to wherever, and for as long as Nikolas required him to, if only Nikolas would ask for these things. But he didn't. Nikolas resembled a man marching dangerously to a drum roll that only he could hear, some imperative he was unable or unwilling to ignore. Ben clenched his jaw, regarding the light shining through the pale green oil. His stomach roiled. Guilt and jealousy. What painful twins to carry. Because it wasn't really Nikolas's new obsession or his remorse that woke Ben abruptly in the middle of the night, which turned food to acid in his stomach. It was the other matter. The other one.